Hi guys, and welcome back to Reaction Calls. So today we're going to do another video. Today we're going to do one about colonization and kind of the colonization lie that the Europeans like to tell. So today we're just going to go through a few things, talk about a few things, and because in European schools this kind of side is not really taught about. They really talk about the so-called benefits and positives and things like that, and it's only really later that you realize that there's a whole different side to it. So colonization started in around 1500. It started basically kind of after the Ottomans closed off the Silk Road. So what is that? So the Ottomans was a very, very powerful empire. There was a Islamic caliph. They rose to power after defeating what was the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines. They ruled over what is now modern Turkey, parts of North Africa, the Levant, parts of the Baltics, I believe, and parts of the Middle East. So there was a road, they called it Silk Road, between all the way from the likes of China that would come in, and it was actually a very, very ancient road. They would take and export goods from the far east of Asia all the way up until Europe, and there was trade, there was vast trade. There's been ancient Roman coins found in China. There's been ancient, Chinese silk found in all parts of what was the Roman Empire. But during, of course, when the Ottomans came in power, they kind of closed that off in the late 13, 14 or so hundreds. They closed it off to the other European powers. They said, you have to pay, a certain amount of money for us to allow this stuff through, because like I say, the main hub was what is modern day Turkey. So for everything to come through, it had to go through there. And the Ottomans, of course, their main place was what is now modern day Turkey. So of course the Europeans had to find a new way. What they didn't want to pay this extra money, especially to a powerful kind of enemy. So they wanted to find new routes. So they went to sea, and in around about 1500, like say the Europeans, they found, just between like 1490 and something, they found a way to sail across southern Africa and the southern Americas. So they found a way for new trade routes, which is what they wanted. But with these new trade routes, they found new peoples and, of course, new opportunities. So they spread into the Americas, and they spread into Africa, and then they would spread into India. So now, of course, we get to the point where Europeans tell this heroic kind of story of how they helped these people, how they helped, uplift almost these people, and how they benefited them so much. But if you look at the reality of it, they didn't. They helped themselves. So we can just go over a few things to kind of tell you how they helped themselves. So in India, of course, the British like to talk about India. You get a lot of English people now talking about how they, helped India, and how India is not doing well now because of the British left. But the British did not help India. And one of the basic good ways to know how much the British didn't help India was during the British Raj, which is what it was called back then. The reading rate, the literacy rate for Indians, for male Indians during the British Empire was around about 12%. For women, it was 7%. Today, I believe it is over 70%. So the Indian education didn't go up until the British left. In fact, the British put in and implemented policies to keep education away from the Indians. I believe the life expectancy of an Indian during the British Empire was around about 32 years old. So, which is a stark contrast to what the British will teach you of what, they did there. Also, if we look at Africa as the continent itself, the Europeans talk about how they uplifted. But if you look at around 1884, November 15th, November 24th, some of the most powerful European countries came together in a Berlin conference requested by Leopold, I believe, and hosted or put together by Otto von Bismarck, I believe, somebody like that. So you had the most powerful figures in Europe all coming together. And the reason for that is to cut up and carve up Africa. They believed it was a best course situation for them. What they didn't want to do was go to Africa and have all the European powers fighting over each other for land in Africa. They didn't want, weakening themselves. They didn't want one getting too strong, and they didn't want to be fighting. So they came together and they basically agreed, disagreed, came to terms of who gets who and who gets what from Africa. So they carved up Africa. The borders you know today is what they carved up. They put warring tribes together, they put friendly tribes, they cut them up, they destroyed empires that was there in Africa, and they did it all for the benefit of themselves. What's also good to know is that during that time, during that conference, there was not one single African that was there. Not a leader, not even a person. And I believe only two people in that room, two Europeans, had actually been to a place in Africa. So again, that tells you how little they cared about what they was doing. Same can be said for what they did in the Americas, the Spanish and the Portuguese. The amount of silver, the Spanish actually took so much silver and so much gold from the Americas that it actually collapsed, I believe, the Spanish economy during that time. That's how much they took. They took too much that they could actually, their economy could actually handle. It collapsed the economy almost. And of course they went and they destroyed millions upon millions of people. And it's been a contrast throughout time of what they done. If you look at World War II, which is very recent if you think about it, it really isn't long ago. Around about 2.5 million Indians fought for European powers, for the Allies. Over 1 million Africans also fought for them. Yet today, and let's be honest, today, if you had 3 people trying to come to England, let's say, you had an African man, an Indian man, and a German man. The African man, his grandfather was let's say, a soldier who fought for the Allies. The Indian man is the grandfather fought for the Allies. And the German man's grandfather fought against the Allies, fought for Germany. Who do you believe has the easiest way to get to Europe? It's the German. So again, Africans, Indians, Americans, they've all put their lives on the line for Europeans, and still they don't get that recognition. In fact, during World War II, the Native Americans were very vital in certain points. What they did was they used their native language over transcripts, over radios, so the Germans couldn't decipher it, and they don't get thanks for that. If you look in World War II, we speak of, how great we did, this, that, and the other. But we never give thanks to the Africans, to the Indians, to the others that helped. In fact, during World War II, Britain, because of British policies for exporting food and goods and things like that, Britain actually caused a famine of around about 2 million or something people that died in Bengal because of policies that England put out, which could have been avoided very, very easily. So you look at all these things, and then there's still that stigma that the Africans, Indians, they're never thanked or anything like that. And there's always this stigma that or this statement, this sentence that I really like, what Europeans like to use to, really say, we gave them the trains. That's what they like to say to justify what they did. We gave them the trains. But it makes no sense to me. Like, we gave them the train. Like, you do realize the reason the Europeans built trains in Africa, the reason they built trains in India, wasn't so some local man could get from point A to point B faster. It was so the Europeans could go deep within the continents, deep within the lands on the plains, and deep within the deserts, and take the resources deep within the lands and get them out. That's why they built the trains. They didn't build it to benefit the locals. They built it so they could get resources deep within and get them out to where they need to go. Another thing is, they say, well, we discovered so much within the continents. They didn't. What they did was they found some local person, some local guide. The local guide took them to somewhere, and the Europeans say, look, I've discovered this. And they changed the local name to it. They changed it to a European name, and they say, look, I've discovered this. And oftentimes they wouldn't even work. Oftentimes they would be carried in some sort of like a carriage, and you'll have them around, a few good men with the sticks on, and they'll be carrying them. In fact, there's pictures of old Indian women carrying European men in baskets up hills on their backs, and this European will go back to Europe and tell some great story of how he conquered some unconquerable mountain. So Europeans always like to change this thing and this stigma of, well, if not for Europe, other places would fail. They still do that today. And in Africa also today, they talk about, well, if European leaves Africa, Africa wouldn't be this. It's incorrect. And in most points and in most parts, it's the reverse. Europe heavily relies on the resources, the gold, the riches, the diamonds, the minerals of Africa. If Africa started to really rise and really make Europeans pay for what they take, Europe's economy, Europe's standing in everything would take a massive hit. You look at the iPhone. How much is the iPhone? 1,005? It's something ridiculous now, and each year they take something away from it, right? They take the headphones away, they take the charging point away, each year they take something away. and yet it remains around about 1005. These things are incredibly cheap to produce, but they are also incredibly reliant on minerals from Africa. So you look at that price, 1005, something like that, and they're building it for very cheap, and they're getting those resources for very cheap. How much do you think that iPhone would cost if they had to pay the correct and proper amount, the just amount to African countries for those minerals? 2.5, or 3,000? Now talk about how much they will have to pay for everything else that they take. They are overcharging the European consumer, and they are underpaying the African point where they bring it from. Yet these same European powers will tell you, the European, that we have to keep and stay within Africa, within other places, because they are helping them. They are not. They are helping themselves. They are helping themselves and their riches, which has been a consistent thing for hundreds of years. Like I say, since the Ottomans closed the Silk Road, since the Europeans in the 1500s sailed across the oceans, they have been doing this. They have been taking. And another thing they like to say is, well, for things of like slavery, they like to say, well, their own people sold them to us. It makes no sense. That doesn't justify anything. If somebody sells you a person, and then you go to jail, you go to court, and they say, you're gonna go to jail for the rest of your life because you enslaved somebody and you destroyed somebody physically, mentally, sexually, and then your defense is, well, yeah, but somebody else sold them to me. Like that doesn't absolve you of a crime that you committed. Like, you're going to jail, bro. So, like I say, these Europeans, they often like to use certain keywords to get out of it, like, we educated them. You didn't. Like I say, you stole their education. You kept them down. You kept them away from education. You would often punish them massively for any ounce of them even reading. You didn't keep them healthy or make them stronger. You kept them weaker. You took all their food. You kept them malnourished. You didn't get them richer. You stole all their riches and sent them to Europe. You didn't build great cities for them. You created them for yourselves, for your settlers over there. And the people that you often show, those native people that you often show in those old black and white photos, saying, oh, look how much happier they were. They were your servants. They wasn't there on their own accord. They were your servants in your cities that you built for yourselves, from the riches that you stole from someone else. And then what you didn't build there, you took back to your countries to build your own countries. That's the reality. And even then, like I say, World War I, World War II, millions of these people fought for you in your wars, helped you, gave you resources, gave you everything you needed to defend yourselves. And still, you were not thankful. Still, you will see on YouTube, you probably see on the list video of people say, no, actually the Europeans did this, and Africa would be nothing without the Europeans, and India would be nothing, and South America and the Americas would be nothing. The reality is, Europe has built its foundation on the backs of others, and before that they built it on the backs of other conquered people within Europe. It has been a vast domino effect of building upon building and building. But it also makes me laugh that you'll get these Europeans that will often place themselves on the same level as those European royals or European kings and queens of old, and they'll often place themselves on the same level as that, talking about how great they was. And the reality is that most of those Europeans that you so often find in comments and this saying, oh, we built this, you didn't build anything. The reality is you're descended from the peasants, from the lowest of the low. So the very people you hate, the Africans, the Indians, the very people you hate, and the very people you love, the European royals, the European this. It's funny because the people you love hated you, and the people you hate, the people you love, the royals, saw you in the same standing. That's the reality. You look Africans or Indians and you say, in 1800, we was this, we was that. The reality, or in 1900s, we was this, the reality is your ancestors would have been working in factories in Europe in horrific conditions. Even as children in the Victorian era, you had children working in the factories. You was not descended of some great things, so it makes me laugh when you see all these people talking about how great Europeans were, because the reality is they didn't even benefit the Europeans themselves. They benefited the elite of the elite, the rich of the rich. The reason European royalty speak different to European working class and lower class, the reason they dress different, talk different, walk different, act different, was because they wanted to separate themselves from the peasants. They wanted to separate themselves from what they believed the lesser people. So they changed the way they talked. They changed the way they articulated themselves and put sentences and constructed sentences. They changed the way they dressed because they wanted to walk through the street or be on a couch through the street and be seen as a different kind of people. That's the reality. So it's funny when you see modern Europeans trying to talk like they were of that same blood, of that same ilk, when the reality is they wasn't. So to stay on topic anyway, like I say, this whole lie of colonialism and colonial effects benefiting Africans and Indians and stuff, it's completely false. It benefited the elite, and again, it makes me laugh when you see Europeans talking about like it didn't benefit them either. It might have benefited them more than the Africans, Indians, and that. But it didn't benefit you enough for you to be on a rooftop singing about look how great we are. It makes no sense to me. But I think Europeans have to realize, and look, there's no way, I don't believe there's any way Europeans are ever going to give back what they took. I don't believe that. But what they could do is stop taking. And what European people could do is say, put their hands up and say, you know what? We kind of did some messed up stuff, and like I say, stop hiding behind everybody else did it. We built the trains. We did the. Cause it's just built on false lies and deception. It really is. It makes no sense. It really doesn't. I mean, and you see now Europeans, they're upset, they're crying because they're having Africans and Indians and all that coming to European countries, and they're crying. They're saying Europe has fallen, the West has fallen. But there's a great saying I like, and it goes like this: a door once opened can be stepped in either direction. Now the Europeans opened that door in the 14 and 1500s when they spread their wings across the oceans. They solidified that by telling these people, you're not of this tribe or that tribe. You're an extension of the British Empire. You're the extension of the German Empire. You're the extension of this empire. You educated those people a very small amount, and what you educated them on was that they their lives were to serve their empires from Europe. You told them that they are the extension of European empires. Well, your empires have came home, yet you are angry. So again, that points to the fact that you never saw Africans as a part of your empire and a part of your own people. You never saw the Indians as that, nor the South or North or Central Americans, or the Asians. You saw them as property. You saw them as a means to get resources from point A to point B. And you saw them as a necessary usefulness during times of war. You never saw them as brothers, as sisters, as fathers, as sons or daughters, or as part of who you are. You never saw that. You simply saw them as property. So again, before we make this video too long, I would end it there. Thank you for watching. If you disagree, you can comment. The comments are always open. If you want to give your side of the story, again, the comments are always open. If you agree, you can further speak your mind in the comments. If I missed anything, got anything wrong, you can put them in the comments. Yeah, like I say, this is a new YouTube channel. I'm going to be uploading every day a new video. If you have any ideas, any topics, any questions, put them in the comment section. I'll answer. I reply to most comments. Even if they're hate comments, I reply. I don't really care about that stuff. I'm here to try to spread some history. History is what I study. It's what I love. So yeah, have a great day. I'll see you next time. This has been Reaction Call. Peace.